Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. On behalf of the four promises, he's not going to screw up. Right? So, same. Anyways, we are live. This is being webcast, so please make sure your cell phones are off. If you do have a question, there will be some Q&A parts. Please use the microphone. Even though he's only 2 feet away from you, everybody else can't hear you because we have millions of people watching who don't want you to screw up. Right? Well, I will do my introduction now.
That's going to be really good.
And
now I'm done.
For those of you who are not Forward members, please, after this event, please go and sign up. It's very important. You'll get lots of benefits. So please make sure you sign up. The website's on the page, freemanforward.com. Hit join and you're done. Well, you have to be approved and may not approve you. Anyways, so our guest today is a founder and chief catalyst of Day One Leadership, Inc., which helps organizations around the world increase their leadership capacity. Can't read that. His clients have included some of the world's most dynamic companies and organizations, including McDonald's, Hyatt Hotels, Kohl's, JP Chase Morgan, and over 75 colleges and universities. Prior to founding Day One, he spent 8 years as the director of one of Canada's largest leadership development programs at the University of Toronto and serving as a national chair of one of Canada's largest youth charities, which mobilized 35,000 volunteers to raise $1 million annually to the support of the work of Cystic Fibrosis Canada. Drew has spoken to over 250,000 people. Hey, so now you can be over millions. Yes. After today with the millions of employees. Nice. In 5 continents, been featured on the Huffington Post, Radio America, Forbes.com, and TED.com. Ooh. His TED Talk has been voted one of the 15 most inspirational TED Talks of all time. And he has been named by Time Business Insider and Inc. magazines as one of their 10 speeches that will make you a better leader. Promise?
I'm really intimidated now, man. I was fired up, and I'm just scared now. You're Canadian, man. We're supposed to be nice to each other.
We're in Vegas. I lost a lot of money last night. His first book, This is Day One, A Practical Guide on Leadership That Matters, debuted at number 6 on the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list and has gone to become an international bestsellers. Those of you who got books, thank you. There is going to be a survey after, so there's some training that you can do, that course that he offers. It's a great course. I looked at it. So do the survey. You can fill in and request that you get one of those registrations, and we'll do a draw after. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Drew Dudley.
Thanks, my friend. I appreciate it. Oh. Can you just whisper, "Don't screw up," as he walked off the stage? Like, I'm usually really confident once I walk up here, but I'm really scared now. And in true Canadian fashion, I apologize for that. It's wonderful to be here, to everybody here and to the millions and millions watching at home. It means a lot to come and work with Freeman because obviously when you travel around the world and you speak a lot, you see your name. And it means a lot to get the chance to come here and be invited to be a part of this. Because I do have a cool job. I get to travel all over the world, explore with people what leadership means to them, what it means to their organizations, and what it means to their communities. And for a decade, I got to stand in front of classrooms and teach leadership at the University of Toronto. And even though I've been pulled out of the classroom, I still love just randomly pointing at people and demanding they answer one of my questions. I like how you've just locked eyes with me. So I do want to begin by asking a question to everyone here. And if you're in a group of people at home, please also do this. But if you're alone, don't. It's just creepy. By show of hands, how many of you are 100% completely and totally comfortable with calling yourself a leader? Well done, my friend. There was one person over here who raised his hand. And that's it. That happens all the time. What usually happens is either people in the front row raise their hand because you have no idea, no one behind you has done it, or after an awkward pause, at which point all the senior executives of a company look really unhappy. One person puts up their hand to just say, "Oh my God." Look, don't feel bad. Obviously, we have to recognize that's a problem. But don't feel bad because it's a problem everywhere. I've asked the question to over 1,000 audiences around the world, which is different industries, backgrounds, ages. Less than 1% of the time have I had half the people in the room raise their hands. One time out of 100. And what you just saw is indicative of a society-wide tendency to make leadership into something bigger than us. To make it about money, to make it about power, to make it about changing the world. And even if you're proud of what you do and you know you're good at your job, there is a hesitation to think that you're changing the world. So what we do is a lot of hands stay down, Because what happens is we treat leadership like it's something we need permission to use that title. You make enough money, you rise high enough in your profession, some external individual or organization bestows upon you whatever it is you think you need to be able to call yourself a leader in front of other people. But until we get the external permission, what I found in doing this for years is that most people feel that calling yourself a leader, especially in front of other people, calls for a level of cockiness and arrogance with which you don't want to be associated. And a big part of that is how we teach it to you. Like, I'm from the education system, and most of you realize, if you think back, if there's a concept that we want to teach to people, especially young people, when we introduce it, the number one way we introduce it is we give you examples of the concept, which helps. But I think we also have to recognize whatever example you're given first for any idea, it shapes the way you think of that concept for the rest of your life. It also limits how you think about that concept for the rest of your life. So think back to how you were taught about what a leader was. The first actual examples of the people that they held up when they said this is what a leader was. And for most people on the planet, the examples you were given were giants. They were presidents, and they were scientific groundbreakers, and they were people who conquered empires. And the vast majority of them were also white men. And we're still doing it. We're still doing that to kids today. They're being told, look at Warren Buffett invest, and look at Steve Jobs innovate, look at Mark Zuckerberg create this empire. And I don't think there's a problem with celebrating successful people, looking up to successful people. The challenge is when the only people we use as examples of leaders are in fact giants, it causes most of us to devalue the leadership that we do demonstrate every day. And we start to let moments of leadership pass us by, and we don't recognize them as leadership, and we don't celebrate them as leadership. We don't let ourselves feel good about them. For better or for worse, the stuff that makes you feel good when you do it is the stuff that you're driven to do every day. If it feels good, you will do it more often. And so when we let moments of leadership pass us by without celebrating them, and when I say moments of leadership, I don't mean moments of influence. I don't mean moments of fame or success. What I'm talking about are moments of things like empathy and compassion and generosity and gratitude. When we let those moments pass by, they are moments of leadership. The thing is, we don't call them that. What we most frequently call those things is the little things. It's the little things that you do. It's just those little things throughout the course of the day. However, those little things probably have impacted the people you care about the most far more than your job has, far more than your title has, yet we diminish them. When we call them little, what we're effectively doing is reinforcing this idea that for something to be considered big or for something to be considered leadership, it needs to make you rich or it needs to make you famous. Because when we let moments of leadership pass us by and not recognize them, we let moments of leadership pass by our colleagues, pass by our friends, pass by the people we love, and we don't recognize them as leadership. What we're effectively doing is we're pulling leadership out of our organizations, pulling it out of our communities, off this planet, and out of our lives. And we need it. Like, I've studied leadership my whole life. I guarantee you there is no shortage of leadership on this planet, but we are systematically ignoring a huge percentage of the leadership that surrounds us every day in our organizations, in our communities, and in our own lives because we've chosen to define it too narrowly. And what really worries me is we've created a world where the vast majority of the leadership on the planet comes from people who don't think they're leaders. I think we can start to change that. I want to talk about a strategy to do it on a personal level. And by doing it on a personal level, how to start impacting and empowering the people around you. I talk about how to create cultures of leadership, plural, cultures. Because every organizational culture, every group culture is built on the personal cultures of the people within it. And culture is a powerful controlling force. Like, cultural expectations control how you behave. They control what you say, what you wear, to what you aspire, of what you're ashamed. They're so powerful. And I think the reason is because rules, policies, and procedures are meant to be broken. Like, we all know we're going to break them. And as long as you don't break past a certain level, you are forgiven. It's built into society. But you break a cultural expectation, and the pushback is swift and universal. The best way I describe the difference is, If I told you I got a speeding ticket on the way here, you don't think less of me as a human being. But if I show up today without pants, look, that's as arbitrary a cultural expectation as how fast you can drive. But your opinion of me drops precipitously. And that thing is, speed limits save lives, pants we made up. Like, to quote the immortal Homer Simpson, don't you hate pants? But you see the difference? That's a cultural expectation. So the more behaviors in this organization and in your life that are driven by cultural expectations that you had a hand in creating, instead of rules, policies, and procedures, better off you're going to be. How do we create cultural expectations to live like leaders, recognize leaders, to empower other people? I'm going to start with this question. I'm going to grab the mic. Hi, front row. See, usually I don't pick on the front row because you sat in the front row, but I don't want to mess with the lighting. So hi, how are you? Right now, all of you at home are thinking, I'm glad we're doing this mobile. I warned you all, and I don't ask for hands. Are you ready?
Sure.
There
Yes.
you go. What is your personal leadership philosophy?
To involve as many people so I can learn as much as possible, I guess, just to continue growing myself.
Cool. You're making that up right now, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Not a problem at all. Thanks for admitting that, okay? The way I look at a personal leadership philosophy really is this. What is your personal philosophy for making decisions? Because if you really want to break it down, your leadership philosophy is, this is how I'm going to consistently make decisions. Now, the reason I ask the question, I want all of you to think about it right off the top, is because it's not just some esoteric concept. What the research shows is that people who can tell me what that is, and by articulate their personal leadership philosophy, it means this. You can do it in 30 seconds or less. When you do, it's not the first time you've done it in the last 72 hours. And if I asked someone who worked with you closely what your personal leadership philosophy is, they'd be able to rhyme it off for me. Like, if you want, at some point during this presentation, take out your phone, text someone who works with you closely or knows you really well, and just text them, hey, what's my personal leadership philosophy? You will get a question mark back in many cases, but it'll really be illuminating for you, because what your personal philosophy is, if people roll their eyes when they say it back because you've said it so many times, what it means is you've made clear how you evaluate your decisions and other people's. And people like working with people when they know how they're going to evaluate decisions, how they're going to react to certain behaviors. And why it's so important is people who can do that are ranked 110% more effective as leaders than people who don't have one of those philosophies that they say all the time. You are 135% more likely to be trusted, and the people who work with you rank you as 140% more effective than people who don't have one of these philosophies. So I want to start off by saying, start formulating that and articulating it out loud, how you make decisions. For me, when I found that research, when I discovered it, I tried to adopt this philosophy. And if you don't know what it is, ask people, text them. Because when I found out that research, asked 10 of my students, what do you think my personal leadership philosophy is? Because I had no idea. And 7 of the 10 gave me some version of this, because apparently when they came and asked me questions about life or business or their jobs, before they left the room, I would give them some version of this. When you don't know what to do in a situation, ask yourself, what would the person who I want to be do in this situation? Then do that. Which is a simple enough way of approaching trying to make decisions. It's incredibly hard to follow. It really is. Because what I found in 15 years of doing personal leadership development, most of us haven't given a ton of thought to who it is we want to be. Because we all went through an education system that taught us you should pay closest attention to the things on which you're going to be tested. And then we never give you tests on what your values are, on who you want to be. It's all about what you want to do one day. And we never ask you, what criteria are you going to use to make the biggest decisions in your life? And so we all become our own worst subjects, especially if you're a high achiever. Because if you're a high achiever at a really young age, people figured out that you could get crap done. And so they started asking you to do it. And you got rewarded for it. And your life quickly became about reaching this level that people expected from you, and you took pride in that. But what happens is we never got a chance to sit back and ask ourselves anything about ourselves, because it's always about what we could get done for other people. And we got to take some time to understand what values drive us. I was one of these people who fundamentally thought I understood who it was I wanted to be. And then a student totally screwed it up for me. 28 years old, first time I've ever given a lecture at the University of Toronto. I'm lecturing on leadership theory. And theory is the word you add to interesting things to make them boring. So halfway through the class, I just stop with the textbook and I start talking about some of the ideas I'm going to share with you. And at the end of it, a young woman comes up to me and says what every professor likes to hear at the end of your first ever lecture. She says, "I don't get it." I said, "It is a broad concept. Can you be more specific?" And she says, "I don't get leadership anymore." I said, "No problem. That's why we're doing this course. You can figure it out. All semester, we got to figure that out." And she says, "No, I understood it before I came here. Now I don't get it." Which, full disclosure, that's what I want to happen. It's the whole purpose of my career now. That was my first day, though, and I thought I'd let her down, and she's paying tuition. So I said, "Okay, what confuses you the most?" And we'll start there. She said, "I'm an international student. I didn't grow up here. Where I grew up, we were taught the smartest people are supposed to be the leaders. The smartest people are the ones who get the best grades when they're in school. So if you get good grades, it's your way of showing the world that one day you deserve to be a leader. And if you don't, it's your way of showing that you never deserve that responsibility. But after listening to you, I think leadership means something different in Canadian." And we can talk about whether Canadians own language later, eh? But she says, "Could you explain what leadership means to you in the simplest English terms possible?" And I don't know if you've ever been asked a question to which you are certain you have an answer until someone asks you the question. Because I opened my mouth to give what I think both she and I assumed would be a brilliant answer. Nothing. Nothing was in my brain. So I did what educators have been doing for years when you get stumped by a student. "Well, what do you think?" To her enduring credit, only student I ever had who looked back at me and said, "I don't know, that's why I asked you." Which I thought was a little snarky for the first day of class, by the way. And so I pulled this one out. "Well, why don't you go home and think about it? Reflect on it. And we'll open up next class with a discussion." And she said, "Thank you, sir. No problem." Because now I get to go home and figure out the answer. And I joke about that now. I was really upset with myself that day. I was really, really shaken by that because leadership was a value I wanted to embody every day of my life. I wanted to stand for it in everything I did, personally and professionally. I had it on my business card. Ran the biggest leadership program at the biggest university in the country. And this woman asked me the most basic question, "What does it mean?" And I choked on it. So I went home and I posed myself a hypothetical. And can I steal that back from you? As I move quickly back into the light for my good men at the back. How you doing, my friend? All right, you ready? Remember, they got to hear you at home.
Gotcha.
Oh, nice. All right. This is the hypothetical I want to pose to all of you, but I'd like you to answer in front of everybody and the millions and millions at home, okay? That's okay. You got the back to the camera. I got to face this stuff, okay? I want you to imagine that someone follows you around for 30 days of your life without your knowledge, which I know sounds creepy. But I always say her name is Abigail, and no one named Abigail has ever been intimidating. Right now, someone in this room is thinking, "I know an Abby, and she's the worst." She follows you around for 30 days out of your life. She sees how you interact with people you love, with people you hate, people you've never met before. Public, private, and online, which is where any number of people bail out of this hypothetical, okay? At the end of those 30 days, if I sit her down, and I'm sorry, what's your name?
Vince.
Vince, you followed Vince around without his knowledge, based only on his behavior. What 3 values does he prioritize in his life above all others? What 3 values does he want to leave in his wake, personally and professionally? What 3 values does he hope his kids learn from him? And what 3 values does he pivot to whenever he has to make the toughest decisions in his life? If you've been the man or if you've been the woman that you want to be for those 30 days, what 3 values do you hope that guy says, or Abigail says about you?
Passion, caring, And pride.
Passion, caring, and pride. Amazing. Now, imagine the young woman from my class walks up to you and says, I'm sorry, English is not my first language. I have never heard the word passion before. Could you explain what it means? And because I want to know what behaviors are associated with it, could you start your definition with the phrase, a commitment to? So passion is a commitment to what?
A commitment to being the best in everything.
Nice, I like it. When was the last time you defined that?
It's been a while.
It's been a while. You've never defined that, actually. But nice try, my good man. All right, you mind passing it to the man right there? Yeah, that's a great reaction. He's just like, what? All right, you ready, my friend?
No.
Okay, don't forget, you've got millions of people at home who are so happy they didn't come live.
Goodness gracious.
You gotta hold the mic up, my friend. Okay.
All right.
What was the first value that popped? You don't have to give three, just the number one value above all others that you want to define you.
Honesty.
Honesty. Perfect. I want you to imagine a 5-year-old walks up to you. Okay? And by the way, free leadership tip. Spend time with 5-year-olds. 5-year-olds are the greatest leadership professors of all time because 5-year-olds are relentless in their questioning. How many of you raised a 5-year-old at some point? Okay. You can't BS them. They will ask follow-ups until you're dead. Like, they spot inconsistencies. Imagine if every politician on the planet had to answer to a room full of 5-year-olds. Yes, that's not what you said yesterday. I'm going to go back to that, to 5-year-olds a little bit later. A 5-year-old walks up to you and says, what does honesty mean? Please say it's a commitment to what?
This is to a 5-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Well, they don't know half the words I was going to say. So I guess I would say, if you're able to do it in front of me and the rest of the world, it's a commitment in doing the same thing in front of everyone.
I really like that definition of honesty. The same, I thank you very, very much, my friend. You get to hold on to the mic.
No.
No. You get to pick who goes next. Then his whole face just changed. Look, these are the number one values that define us, and it's really hard, one, to pick what they are, and two, to tell them what they mean. I'm not going to ask any of you in this room a question that at some point did not stump me. I had a friend who had never seen me speak come to a presentation a month ago, and afterwards she just said, all you do is take the questions you couldn't answer and torture other people with them. Yes. I went home that night after that woman asked me that question, and I posed myself the same sort of hypothetical. Room full of people I highly respect, talking about me, and I'm not there. What words would I love to hear them using? And I didn't just stop at 3. I must have listed about 40. This is a portion of the list: integrity and courage and friendship. But what I did is every time I wrote down one of those words, I imagined that young woman from my class walking up and saying, I'm so sorry, English isn't my first language. I've never heard the word respect before, or courage. Could you explain what it means in the simplest English terms possible? And like most of you in this room, most of you watching, you give me 5 to 10 minutes with any one of those words, and I can give you a remarkable definition. But I was 28 years old that night, and it was the first time I had ever bothered to try to define almost any of these words. And what struck me as the problem is I had spent the better part of 15 years evaluating how I felt about myself as a professional, as a friend, as a human being, based on how well I lived up to this list of values. And I judged other people swiftly, and I judged them harshly if I thought that they didn't live up to this list of values. Whether we're aware of it or not, most of the judgments we make about our own behaviors and those of others is based on a very quick subconscious evaluation. Here's the behavior, here are the values I believe make a good person, do they match? So that means that most of the judgments you've made about yourself and other people for most of your life, you have never been clear on the criteria you're using to do it. And that's why I tell leaders of all ages, all backgrounds, we have to take the time to define the things that we want to define us. Because let's say you want to embody passion every day of your life. At work, at home, in your friendships. If you haven't defined what passion actually means, if you haven't said these are the behaviors that define it so that you can turn it into a finish line, so that you know when you pass it, you could be, and you probably are, embodying passion and honesty and respect and generosity every day of your life. The problem is you're not allowing yourself to take credit for it. Because most of the moments in your life where you are being the woman or the man that you want to be are passing by unrecognized and uncelebrated by you because you haven't defined that's what they look like. And look, it's the celebrations in our organizations and in our lives that give us momentum, that give us pride, that move us forward. And I believe that setting goals is basically planning celebrations. And we set goals for our organizations. I've seen it on the wall here. By 2025, right? I love that you have that on the wall. And we set goals for organization, we set goals for our careers, we set goals for our finances. My argument is a personal culture of leadership, which allows you to invest in yourself, invest in others. A personal culture of leadership comes from spending just as much time, just as much energy, and just as many resources setting and chasing goals for your daily behavior and your daily character as you do for your organization, your finances, and your career. Because what I found is that individuals who haven't defined the things they want to define them, no matter how much money they make, no matter how famous they are, or how it seems to other people objectively successful they are, if you haven't defined the values you care about and said, this is what they stand for to me, people have a really hard time answering what I think is an essential question. Before you can add value to other people, you have to be able to answer this question. My friend, who gets that microphone?
Hey, Emma.
He was so waiting for that. He's like, Emma. Hi, Emma. How are you?
Good.
Say hello to the millions of people who are about to judge your answer.
Hello.
That was the sweetest hello ever. I'm going to ask you the most difficult question in the presentation, okay? Why do you matter?
Because I am an individual that can bring, insight and collaboration to others.
Awesome. When was the last time someone asked you that question?
Never.
Excellent. Do you mind passing the mic to the person next to you? Hi, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Drew?
I'm excellent. What's your name?
Kristen.
Kristen, why do you matter?
I have a team of people looking up to me, watching what I do, and just trying to make them the best that they can be.
Awesome. When was the last time someone asked you that question?
Never.
Never. That's not unusual. Like, usually the number one response to that question is blink, blink, and this like sort of from the crowd because you're really happy I didn't ask you. How many of you have kids again? All right, here at home, I know you're not at home, but the home crowd. Go home tonight and ask your kids that question. If your kids are not yet 5 years old, they will give you incredible answers to that question. Stuff that melts your heart. My favorite was a woman sent me the video after my presentation, and she asked her son, she's holding the phone, and she says, why do you matter? He goes, because I'm a hug monster. And then the camera goes black, which I thought was awesome. But something happens to all of us around the time we turn 4 or 5. We get sent to school. And we stop believing that why we matter is up to us to determine, and it's supposed to be evaluated by somebody else. And don't forget, most of us spent 20 of the most formative years, at least, of our lives in that system. And as a result, we often never unlearn that lesson. That why you matter, it's not up to you and you have no right to say it. Somebody else tells you why. Somebody else evaluates it. They do it with grades at first, and then they do it with salary, and then they do it with titles. We never unlearn that lesson. And I think that's a dangerous thing. The first time I ever asked it was to one of the most extraordinary young students I've ever known. And he was about to graduate, and he was freaked out, and he came and we talked. We become friends, and you sort of want to find a way to mentor. And I decided, the first time I ever asked it, I didn't know what it did to people. And I said to him, Kyle, man, let's start here. Why do you matter? And he did the double blink, and he said, well, I don't yet. That's why I'm working so hard. And that's an unacceptable answer to get from anybody that you care about. So I asked other students. They couldn't answer. I asked professionals. They couldn't answer. I'm asking CEOs. They can't answer. I couldn't believe how many people in this world are unconsciously going through life really believing I don't matter yet. That's why I'm working so hard. I think we have to be able to answer that question. And you know why it's so hard? Not only has no one ever asked us, but because we hope to matter, and we hope to lead, and we hope to make a difference. Hope's a powerful force. And we should foster hope in our life and the life of everybody that we touch. Hope, however, is a terrible strategy. If you want to matter, if you want to lead and you want to make a difference, we have to plan to matter, plan to lead, and plan to make a difference. I want to give you a strategy on how to do that. Not just say it's important. Here's one way of actually doing that. Do you mind passing the microphone to somebody else? And you have lost a friend. Okay.
I'll remember this, Kristen.
I'm going to give you some power right now. I want you to imagine that you had the power to pick one value and one value only. And whatever value you choose, every single person in America will do one thing every day to live up to that value. It's not the only value that they'll live up to, but it is the only guaranteed one. If you had that power, what value would you choose? I'm curious because apparently everyone's getting along great down here right now.
They're not. I think based on that, I would pick respect.
Respect.
Mm-hmm.
Respect is a commitment to what?
Respect is a commitment to treating others the way you'd want to be treated and looking at others' perspectives or viewpoints openly.
That's awesome. I will point out the second part of that contradicts the first. Because you just listed the golden rule, right? Treat other people like you would like to be treated.
I should have said as they would like to be treated.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's the platinum rule. I love that. A really successful CEO, when I told him I try to live by the golden rule, was like, that needs to be revised. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know who wrote it, right? And he said, no, treat other people like you would like to be treated is the golden rule. The platinum rule is treat other people like they would like to be treated. Because ultimately that means you have to ask a key question. How would they like to be treated? Which means empathy becomes a fundamental part of respect. So I wasn't picking on you there. I found that such an eye-opener when someone told me that. I try to share it whenever I can. I gave that power to my students. I said, everybody on this campus will do one thing, pick the value. And they actually surprised me. They picked impact. I said, okay, impact is a commitment to what? Their definition, it's a commitment to creating moments that cause people to feel as if they are better off for having interacted with you. Because there can be negative impact. But these moments, just in a moment where someone walks away, they bounce off you in this world a little bit better off, that's the impact. I said, amazing, cool. It's a lot easier to stand up for an ideal than it is to live up to one. So here's our assignment. We're going to live up to this, and you're going to get graded on how well you do it. So I said, go out every day. You have to do at least one thing that lives this value, and you have to come to my office at the end of the day, look me in the eye, and tell me what it was, which was a really cool assignment for 3 days. Because what happened was they'd get to my outer office, and I'd watch them. They'd stop, and they'd do this. And they were looking back over their day, picking a moment. And they usually had one because they were awesome kids. But what they were doing is they were using this core value to evaluate behavior that had already happened. Leaders use their values to drive behavior and to impact decision-making in the moment. So we needed a different approach. Now, the cool thing about working at a university is somewhere on the campus is an expert on basically everything on the planet. PhDs know an incredible amount about very, very little. I like going out for beers with PhDs and asking them, tell me something from your research that's weird but not interesting. That's a great conversation, trying to come up with stuff that's weird but not interesting. One of my favorites was, when you get ants drunk, they always veer to the left. Climate change, still a thing, but we have the drunk ants down, by the way. But this is an interesting one too. Sorry, we're going off for a second. You're drinking a big Starbucks there? They give spiders drugs, LSD, cocaine, whatever, and then they see what kind of webs they make. Do you know the only drug on the planet that if you give it to a spider, it cannot make a web? Caffeine. Put down the coffees, everybody. So I went to the psych department. Now, in leadership, you never steal an idea. You benchmark a best practice. And so I said, here's the deal. Somebody always loves that one. Okay. Here's the deal. I went to them and said, we want to act a certain way. We have a conscious commitment to it, but it's not enough. Can you give me subconscious motivators that we can put into our plan that make it more likely we'll stay true to what we want to? And they gave me two really interesting phenomena. The first is called the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect says this: stuff that you want to do and haven't finished takes up a more prominent spot in your consciousness than things that you've already completed. Basically, stuff you haven't done on your to-do list bugs you. I was not aware there's a scientific term for that. The second was the question behavior effect. Now, the question behavior effect says, if I ask you a series of questions about a behavior, you're way more likely to engage in that behavior later on, and you won't be aware of it. So if over breakfast I said to you, hey, what does generosity mean to you? Who's the most generous person you know? What's the most generous thing you've ever done? What could you do today that's generous? Later on in the day, you're going to be a more generous person. You're not even going to be aware of it. So if unfinished tasks cause psychic discomfort and questions drive human behavior unconsciously, one of the most powerful phenomena for controlling human behavior are unanswered questions. The human brain hates unanswered questions, can't stand them. It will constantly search for an answer, consciously or subconsciously, and if it can't figure one out, it will make one up. All of folklore is basically this effect. If the brain can't come up with an answer, it will make one up. And so as a result, for instance, before Google was on our phones, has anyone ever had a conversation trying to remember the name of an actor or actress? You can't. A day and a half later in the shower, it pops into your head. Your brain was working on it the whole time and you're not aware. That's a powerful driver. So we said, let's take a different approach. Let's create a question that's carefully crafted so that if you answer it, you'll live the value. Specifically, what we came up with for impact was, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? Leadership's put on a pedestal. So if I walked up to you and I sent you a text or an email and said, the way you do your job, the way you treat other people, the way you invest in other people inspires me, it's made my career better, and you're a leader to me. Look, you're smiling, and I have no idea if any of that's true. It's really unlikely you'll walk away from that interaction or that text and not feel better about yourself. So this became our challenge. For 7 days, I want all of my students to answer this question every day and journal how they answered it. And we were going to find out if we were more likely to keep this value front and center, and if we were more likely to make sure that during the day we thought about it. This question is why I ended up leaving the university, because it was so effective that I started teaching it to people all around the world, because my students destroyed this assignment. Former coaches, former teachers, their parents, their best friends, the incredibly nice hot dog guy on campus. If you're lucky, somewhere in your life, there's someone who works in retail, someone who works front desk somewhere who loves you, you love them, they make you smile. On our campus, it was Muhammad, our hot dog guy. And when I went up to him on Thursday of this assignment, he looks at me and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm buying a hot dog." He said, "No. 3 students have randomly told me I'm a leader this week. What are you doing?" My favorite. One of my most dynamic and brilliant students waited at the bus stop for his bus driver from kindergarten to grade 8. The bus comes, the kids get on, then my student gets on. And the bus driver, because he's good at his job, stops the 22-year-old. "What are you doing?" And he says, "I rode your bus for 9 years, and I was really fat and really smart. And that's a really rough combination when you're in elementary school." And he said, "I was bullied so mercilessly that every day before I could leave my house, I would have to stand in the front hall and cry as hard as I could for 30 seconds before walking outside. And then I'd come to the stop, and you'd come, and I'd get on the bus, and I'd sit in the front because the cool kids sit in the back. Always have, always will." And he said, "You drove us to school, and you would sing Disney songs at the top of your lungs. Badly. And the kids in the back ripped you. They made fun of you the entire way, and you heard every word, and you didn't care. And everything in my life was about what those kids did and what those kids said, and I'd never seen someone not care about it. And every day watching you do it made me think I can do one more day of this because one day I don't have to care. And I go to Harvard for grad school next year, and you're as big a part of that as any teacher I ever had. And I wanted to tell you how big a leader you've been in my life." There were 12 students and 1 instructor. And we created one of those every day, each one of us, which meant when we sat down a week later, not one person over the course of that class didn't cry at least once. Like if you've got the book, it's filled with what happened in my life, in the lives of my students. It was extraordinary. We knew we were onto something. This question did not change who we were. It did not change what we valued, but it made us so much more aware of how much leadership surrounded us every day in our lives that we were not recognizing. It made us so much more aware of how many opportunities for impact we had that we were not seizing. And it made us way, way less likely to let those opportunities pass by anymore because we gamified it. Sometimes we planned ahead. I'm going to tell Muhammad. I'm going to tell my parents. More often, though, what happened was when a moment appeared, this question popped into our head and changed our behavior in that moment. We knew we had something, so we gave it a name. Operationalizing leadership values. Because at the University of Toronto, if it doesn't sound pretentious, you're not trying hard enough. Sounds fancy, but it has 3 steps. Pick something you want to live up to. Not stand up for, live up to. What value? Just pick one to start. 2, define it. Say it's a commitment to what? We throw these words around to judge ourselves and each other our whole lives. Actually sit down and say, here's what it's a commitment to in terms of behavior. Then create a question that embed into your life that's non-negotiable, that you have to answer by the end of the day. And make sure it's not a yes/no question. Did you have impact today? Did you recognize someone's leadership today? Sure. But who did you? How did you? That's a who, what, where, why, and how specificity that it demands. Ultimately, we did this for 30 days with this question, and then we picked a second value and we added a second, and we tried to get 1 out of 2 for the next month. Then a third, 2 out of 3. By the end of the year, we had 6 questions, and we called it the leadership test. And ultimately, we took on a particular philosophy that has fundamentally changed my life, which is this. Imagine before you went to bed every night, you had to prove you deserved another day on this planet. It didn't automatically come to you. You had to prove that you'd earned it. And you do so by passing the leadership test, which means you got 3 out of 6 questions. If that was the scenario, those questions would be a priority every day of our life. They would be non-negotiable. We do them before our email. We do them before our meetings. We would not fit them in when we had time. It would be the #1 priority we had to live up to this to-be list before we worried about our to-do list. The thing is, we have the option to do that. We have consciously chosen to not look at each day as if we should evaluate it for who we are. We have chosen to let days go by where we do absolutely nothing, where we live up to who we want to be. We choose that. And I think that we can choose not to. The leadership test, the book, and my work is about picking your values and creating your own test with customized questions. But for now, let me share just some of them that we use that drive us. If you wanted to walk out of this room today and start using them, no problem. Impact. What have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? You make that question a part of your life for the next 30 days. You journal how you answer it. I did not used to be a journal believer. It fundamentally changes how you think about yourself. Because when you screw up and you feel like you suck, you have it in there, all the good things that you've done. This test gives you evidence that you matter by the end of every day. What did I do today to make it more likely somebody would learn something? I want to dive into that one just for a second, because we're talking about investing in others. Growth is a commitment to expanding the capacity to add value. Leaders add value to each other. That's the key. And ultimately, anything you do that increases your ability to do that or the ability of someone else to do it, then you've embodied a powerful value, the value of growth. One of the great ways you can do this is by learning to ask great questions. We think that leadership's about having answers. It's not. Great leaders ask incredible questions. Questions that the person being asked learns more than the person doing the asking. The question, why do you matter, is one of the best ones I've ever found. Because yeah, I wanted to know what your answer was, although I knew you probably didn't have one, but that's gonna bug you until you come up with a better answer. Tomorrow, you wanna help people grow? You wanna invest in the growth of other people? Do not tell a story tomorrow. Do not give any advice tomorrow. Do not give any statements tomorrow. For 24 hours, force yourself to only ask questions. You will be the most fascinating person in this entire company for the entire day. People just like, wow, that person's so interesting. Oh, what do you know about them? Nothing. But they ask tons of stuff about you. Great questions teach people things. For instance, let's go back to a 5-year-old for a second. I once had a 5-year-old ask me if I was the Pope. You're not ready for that question. I don't know how many Q&As you've done. But in his class, they were talking about the Pope. And when you're 5 and you're talking about a stranger, and then a stranger walks in, oh, it's the dude. He looks at me and says, "Are you the Pope?" I had no idea how to answer it, so I just told him the truth. "No, I'm here to give a speech for your teachers." And this kid looks at me and says, "Oh, what's a speech?" I've given 1,000 of these. No one's ever directly asked me that question. And Marshall McLuhan once said that we don't know who first discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't a fish. Like we are least aware of the environments with which we are most familiar, and we are most familiar with us, and we don't ask questions about it. But every now and then, your brain comes up with a smarter answer than you're entitled to. And I looked at this kid and I said, a speech is an opportunity to change minds. My brain actually went, nice. But he looks back at me and says, "Oh, how do you know that you should?" Shut up. And we need to get you out of school before we wreck you. That is it. Ask incredible questions. When you want to give advice, instead ask why someone is doing something. When you want to tell a story, ask them, what's the backstory for what you're doing this? Learn how to ask incredible questions. It invests in other people's growth, and you're going to learn things along the way as well. What have I done today to make it more likely someone would learn something? That can be you as well. Now, let's talk about empowerment, a commitment to acting as a catalyst for the success of others. Once again, the education system stuck some stuff in our heads that keeps us from investing in each other and empowering each other as much as we can. Ultimately, the first time they ever gave you a grade when you were a kid, you started to realize something. Why would they be grading us if it wasn't to rank us and make sure the people at the top get something the people at the bottom don't get? And what that did is it led us to believe we live in a world of scarcity, where there's only so much money and there's only so many jobs. And if you don't compete to get them, if you come late, you're not going to get as much. But that idea that we live in an economy of scarcity is what leads to so many of the things of which we're ashamed in this world. It's what leads to jealousy. It's what leads to greed. It's what it leads to people building their empires on the exploitation of other human beings. And it's what leads to the bullying that starts on our playgrounds, goes all the way through our offices, and right up to the highest echelons of power on this planet. I believe that empowerment is about recognizing, as hard as it is, choosing to live in a different type of economy. Recognizing, look, I'm not going to blow smoke at you. Maybe there is only so much money and maybe there are only so many jobs, but there is no limit to the amount of satisfaction, self-worth, and happiness available to us all if we can separate satisfaction, self-worth, and happiness from our job titles and from our paychecks. And once we recognize it's not a world of scarcity in terms of self-worth, what we can do is adopt a particular philosophy I tried to teach to all of my students, especially business students who are a special breed. I said, look, if you can outperform 90% of the people in this organization, you'll probably end up making 6 figures. But if you can become the type of person where everybody who works with you outperforms everyone who doesn't work with you, then you are indispensable. And that is so much rarer on this planet, in this organization, than people who can outperform. You were taught to outperform to be successful. My argument is the greatest companies and the most successful leaders always ask themselves, do the people who work with me outperform the people who don't? If that's your priority, you will never want in your career. You will always be valued, and you will always create a career where when other people get promoted, you become closer to getting promoted as well, because people never forget the people who made them better. What have I done today to help someone else move closer to a goal? The value of empowerment. Answer that question every day. You'll build this organization, but at the same time, you're also going to build your career and make it powerful. The COO who I just hired is from way back 12 years ago at the university. He had just started at the university in a relatively minor role. He got involved in my leadership program and helped build it into something extraordinary. And as soon as I had the opportunity to put him in an executive position in my company, more than a decade later, I went and got him. Be that person. Class, how did I elevate instead of escalate today? Here are 3 words that will save relationships and careers. Elevate, don't escalate. When you get that email that makes you talk to the screen, you always, if you've ever worked in a cubicle, you have heard your colleague go, oh, off. And you look over, there's no one there, and they just do this. And you go around and you look at the screen with them and you do the same thing. You're like, oh, come on. Here's the thing. Elevate, don't escalate. Run it through your head. When someone's trolling you online, when someone's being a jerk to you in the service industry, elevate, don't escalate. Elevate means trying to succeed. Escalate means trying to win. Ultimately, sometimes the only way to succeed is to let go of the idea of winning. You want to know the difference between politics and leadership? In politics, fear is added to try to win. In leadership, fear is removed to try to succeed. You want to know the difference between a leader and a catalyst for harm, but might still have influence? How do they use fear? Do they use fear to try to win, or do they remove fear to try to succeed? Be one of those people who removes fear. We're the only creatures on the planet with a gap between stimulus and response. Your leadership, your relationships, and your career will in large part be based on how you use the gift of that gap. And finally, what did I do today to be good to myself? Self-respect is the pillar, the foundation upon which every other value is built. We don't teach self-respect. We don't. We ask our kids when they come home, how did you do at school? What did you learn today? We never ask them, what did you do today to build your self-respect? Because I care about that more than what your grades are. I'll tell you, anybody with great self-respect will get through anything. There is no hole in your life that can't be filled with self-respect. We try to fill it with money. We try to fill it with jobs. We try to fill it with relationships. Whatever hole is in your life, self-respect is what we got to put in there. Self-respect is a commitment to recognizing you cannot add value to anybody else until you've added enough value to yourself. When you're empty, you have nothing to give. So do something every day. If you like those little Werther's candies, put them in the cup holder in your car. There will be a day where it's awful. You go out, you sit down, and they're sitting there, and you'll be like, way to go past me. If you drive to work and you don't have the photograph of someone you love hanging from your rearview mirror, you've missed an opportunity to smile once a day. I did that 5 years ago. Now, sometimes the people we love, we do not like them very much. My photo is double-sided. On one side is my mom and dad. On the other is Jennifer Lawrence. I'm good. For instance, the other thing too, build it into your workflow. For instance, there's not much in my life that's consistent when you're on the road 250 days a year, but PowerPoints are. So what I did is, I think over 5 years ago, I added photographs to my PowerPoints. Every photograph in the background of these slides, I took them. Each one represents a moment of peace, joy, awe, and happiness. And what I've done is I made sure that that reminder is a part of my life every day. Little things, simple things like that. You still catch it, right? You minimize these powerful things, and I still do it as well. We have to pay attention to stuff like that. 6 questions. 2 of them designed to add value to other people. 2 of them designed to add value primarily to me. 2 of them designed to add value to both. With a computer, with a laptop, a phone, I can answer those 6 questions in less time than it takes me to empty my email inbox. For most of my life, though, I prioritized emptying my email inbox over being the man I wanted to be. That was a choice. Ultimately, what this philosophy, this test did, is it recognized something for us all. You are not always in charge of what you have to do every day. It's just the nature of life. But you're always in charge of who you are. And if we don't flex that strength, we forget that we have it. What this does is even on the days where everything outside of your control blows up in your face, you can prove to yourself that the day wasn't a waste. Maybe it's a loss, but it's not a waste. And I think there's a difference between losing a day and wasting a day. You string enough wasted days together, it changes how you feel about yourself. And that changes how you feel about other people and how you treat them. This process of taking a value and turning it into a question that therefore sort of sits in your mind and bugs you until you answer it, you can apply it to your life, but you can also apply it to an organization. For instance, I took a look at Freeman's core values, being curious. Well, how about, when did I ask why today? Too often we just respond to things, we never try to dive down. If you can identify at the end of each day at this organization, when did I ask why? You've shown that there's curiosity here. Seeking growth experiences. What tool did I aim to add to my belt today? One of my favorite stories was Jamie Foxx And he told about how his grandmother would never let him go out and play basketball, play with his friends. She made him sit and play piano for 2 hours before he was allowed to go out, because she kept saying, you need to put tools on your belt, and they may sit there your whole life, and you never know when you have to grab them. And then all of a sudden, one day when he's still the guy from In Living Color, he gets a call. We need a black actor who can really play piano. And he just said, I reached down and there was that tool on my belt. You don't have to put it on today, but what did you do to get a little bit closer? Develop authentic relationships. How was I vulnerable today? Here's a fact that I've realized. Patrick Lencioni taught this to me. You can put energy into one of two things in your life and work. Doing an amazing job or being strategically disingenuous with one another. I love the phrase strategically disingenuous. It just means politics. And politics is when what you say and do is shaped by how you want people to react rather than what you think. Authenticity creates workplaces where people aren't afraid of saying, this is what I'm not good at, this is what I need help with, because they know they won't be attacked for it. And the only way you can create a workplace where you know you won't be attacked is by resisting the urge to attack other people when they show vulnerability. And that's really hard if you don't like them. I'm sure everybody in this entire organization is really good friends with each other. But do not revel in other people's failures, because what happens means when you show yours, someone's coming after you for it. How was I vulnerable? Because when you're vulnerable, you give other people permission to do the same thing. Invest in others. What tool did I help someone else add to their belt today? Something that you become good at. If by the end of today, you can't point to one person who might be better at their job because of you, look, think, for those of you who are a little bit into your career, think of something you wish someone had done in the first month you were here. Then go do it for them. That's the simplest way. Like what was missing in your first month here? And now go do it for somebody else. You have absolutely no idea, because they'll probably do it down the road as well. And finally, own your future. How did you invest in the business of you today? Ultimately, I like to think of my life, I'm the president of it, I'm the CEO. And one of the things that I really like knowing when you look at your life like a business is that one of the most important things you can add is a board of directors, right? Because the president runs the company, but the board of directors, the president has to justify the stuff they do. Fill your life with a really good board of directors. Like, I still have the ones from college. Back in college, the decisions weren't nearly as big. Their biggest input was, perhaps the merger I was considering at the end of the night wasn't in the best interest of the company. But now the biggest decisions, the scariest decisions, I'm leaving my job, I've lost somebody that I love, they're there for that. And we've all gone through it together. Add, what have you done today to invest in the business of you? And one of the best things you can do is invest in others, make them a part of your board of directors. I run a company called Day One Leadership. What I'm talking about here today is identifying what you can do today and treat it like it's the first day of your leadership journey. Whether you feel like a leader, where'd he go? All right, apparently he didn't need to know. He was a leader, he's like, I got it down. But today is day one. Now, day one, I put it in there because on day one, there's a fundamental commitment, humility, and forgiveness, because it's the first day of anything. And I've had so many day ones in my life. I had day one of starting my own company, which was so hard because a university is the most secure job on the planet. And leaving is hard because one thing I've learned is the three most addictive things on the planet: crack, carbohydrates, and a salary. And getting hooked on any of them means that you don't have as many choices in your life as you thought. We treat all of them as an addiction sometimes. I had day one of being a vocal advocate for mental health awareness, which meant every time I speak to an audience, I make it a point to tell anyone who will listen, I'm bipolar. Mental illness is a fundamental part of my life. And it's hard to talk about that because we still too often equate mental illness with mental weakness. And my entire career is based on whether or not you find my ideas credible. But one of the things that I found when I talk about that authenticity is I was afraid that when you say it, you look embarrassing, you look weak, or you look unemployable. And for most of our lives, I think we get taught if you want to seem impressive, what you need to do is be able to make people say, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I found that one of the more powerful things that all of us have the capacity to make happen is to make other people say, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. That's a powerful phrase to give people. I thought I was the only one afraid of that. I thought I was the only one hiding that. I thought I was the only one hurt by that. The problem with pushing things out of the light that you're fighting is they wait for you in the dark. All of us are fighting something quietly because we think it will make us look weak, embarrassing, or unemployable. There are other people in this room who are dealing with it as well. I don't tell people that because I want anyone to feel bad for me. I don't have a good life for someone with mental illness. I have a great life. I want other people to know that. There's not a cap on it. I thought there was. So I like to share that. I had day one being open with that. I had day one going from 320 pounds to at one point 200. But I don't worry what the scale says. What I evaluate every day is there were behaviors that took me from that to 100 pounds lighter. I started one day doing them, and I just did it again. Am I doing those behaviors? That's more important than the scale. And I had day one of a life without alcohol. I'm powerless over alcohol. Step one. But one of the things I learned in recovery is if you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you have to choose to not have a drink today. And then you have to treat every day of the rest of your life as if it's your first day of recovery. Because anything that you commit to for the rest of your life is too intimidating. It's way too intimidating to commit to anything forever. But you can do it today. And because there's that commitment, that humility, and that forgiveness, if you screw up on the first day of a commitment, that's okay. People do that. You recommit. You don't give up. But the key for me is if you've been doing something for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that doesn't matter today. All that matters is if you do that behavior, the non-negotiable behavior today. The idea of the day one concept is this. Every one of us on the planet woke up this morning having accomplished the exact same number of leadership behaviors. None. And if you're a CEO, great, you did a whole bunch in your life, but you didn't do any today. And if you got hired yesterday here, great, you didn't do anything today. So we have an opportunity and an obligation to live that every day. Day one is about saying, these are the non-negotiable leadership behaviors that will be a part of my life for the rest of my life. And you know what? Maybe that's intimidating. So let's not worry about all of it. Let's just worry about today. Treat every day like it's your first day on a voyage. Commitment, humility, and forgiveness. And the things you do on the first day, here are my values, here are what they mean, and here's the question that I will make sure I answer. And don't worry about 6. Start with 1. That's all it takes. Start with 1. And then add as you go along. I didn't used to see leadership as this thing that I think everyone can and should, to which everyone can and should aspire, because I know there's a former teacher in here who caught that grammar. There it is. Something to which all of us can and should aspire. I used to see it as a competition. There was a small club of leaders that not everyone can or should get into. Because why would I be working so hard if you got to join in too and you didn't work as hard, or you're not as smart, or you're not as accomplished? And everybody in that club who got more money, more respect, more prestige, they all look like me. So for me, it was never a problem to look and say, I have every right to call myself a leader. 20 years ago, I didn't realize that's not true for everybody. We got to recognize that. And then something started to shift. And it was one particular moment that acted as a relatively profound catalyst for it. Some of you have heard it before, but I'll share it because I think it really gets down to the point of what kind of leadership we can embody every day. I was at my first university for 7 years because I was told that letters after your name make you smarter. So I collected them. And on my last day at that university, the university paid for a party as a goodbye party. I was there so long. And a young woman came up to me at that party and said, I remember the first time I ever met you. And she told me a story that had happened 4 years earlier. And she said, 4 years ago, the night before my first day here, I became convinced I wasn't smart enough. My town was too small. Everybody was cooler than me. I was not ready for this in my life. And I started to cry. And my parents were amazing. They hadn't seen me cry in years. But they said, look, here's the deal. We know you're scared. Trust us. We are way more afraid than you are. But you owe it to yourself to try. You worked so hard. So here's the deal. Tomorrow, we go to campus. Once you're on campus, if you still feel you can't do it, we will take you home and we love you no matter what. But if you don't at least try tomorrow, you'll regret it the rest of your life. Our job as your parents is to make sure that doesn't happen. And she said, I knew they were right. So I went and I got in line on the first day and everybody was screaming. Matching face paint, matching t-shirts, coordinated cheers. Because people who plan welcome activities to schools, to organizations, to communities, they're always extroverts. And they plan extrovert fun. Hey, a whole bunch of strangers get together in a really noisy place and talk to one another. For all of you introverts in this room, not your idea of a good time. And what she said to me has always stuck with me when it comes to creating teams. She said, I looked around and said, this is another place where only extroverts are valued. I will not spend 4 more years of my life in a place where you have to yell to fit in. And I always remember that when I'm putting together teams or activities. Am I creating a place where all introverts go, this is a place where you have to yell to fit in, and I don't want that. And she said, standing in line on that day, I just quit. I was done. And as soon as I made the decision, I was overcome with this extraordinary feeling of peace. And I turned to my parents to say, take me home. But before it came out of my mouth, you came busting out of the nearest building with a big stupid hat and a sign that said, students fighting cystic fibrosis, and a bucket of lollipops. And you proceeded to march along this lineup of first-year students and their parents, because I knew they couldn't get out of line. And you were trying to convince us to get up on Saturday morning hungover and shine shoes for 8 hours. And all of a sudden, you got to me and you stopped and you stared at me. It was creepy. But you look at the guy next to me and you smile and you reach into this bucket of lollipops and you hold one out to him and you say, dude, you have to stand next to an incredibly beautiful woman for 2 more hours. You should talk to her. Give her this lollipop. Give her a lollipop. She goes, I've never seen this dude before in my life, but I've never seen a human being get more embarrassed faster in my life. He turns beet red. He won't even look at me. He just does this with the lollipop. And I feel bad for him. It's his first day. So I take the lollipop from him. And as soon as I do, your entire demeanor changes. And you look so disappointed in me. And you turn to my parents and you say, look at your daughter. Look at your little girl. First day away from home. First day without mom and dad to hold her hand. And already, she's taking candy from a stranger. Nice parenting. She goes, everybody loses it. 20 feet in every direction. Everyone starts to laugh. And there was something that switched in my brain at that moment where I was like, okay, don't quit now. And she goes, the next day someone did something else and I put it off again. And eventually I forgot about it. I never quit. I graduate in a few weeks. I haven't talked to you once in the 4 years since that happened. But I heard that you were leaving. And before that happened, I had to come and tell you, you've been an incredibly important person in my life. And I'm going to miss you. Good luck, okay? And walks off. Don't do that. Don't drop that story on someone and be like, goodbye. And I think she realized it because she got only a few feet away and she comes back and says, there's one more thing you should probably know. I have been dating that dude for 4 years. A year and a half after I moved 1,000 miles away, the two of them invited me to their wedding. She married the dude. But here's the thing. I don't remember that. Like, I've searched my memory for that moment because I was awesome in that moment. And I like to remember it. No recollection of that. And that's what I want to leave with every audience to whom I get to speak. Maybe the biggest moment of leadership in my life. Maybe the biggest impact I ever had on another human being. A moment that had a girl walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, you have been an incredibly important part of my life, is a moment that I don't even remember. And probably the biggest impact you will have on other people will have nothing to do with your plans. It will almost always be as a result of the unplanned consequences of your everyday actions. From a very young age, we've been taught to try to achieve things and acquire things so that people look at us like we're leaders. So that we think we have the right to raise our own hands and call ourselves leaders, that I think we've lost sight of a really essential truth. The number one determinant of how other people view you and how you judge yourself is how you actually behave on a day-to-day basis. And leadership is always recognizing there's a gap between the person you want to be and how you are actually behaving, and you decide you want to close that gap. You don't deny it's there. You don't rationalize it. You acknowledge there's a gap between the man you want to be and how you are behaving. And look, no matter how much money you make, how high you rise in this organization, how famous you one day become, you will always be aware of the gap between who you want to be and how you are actually behaving. And no amount of external validity will ever make you feel okay when it's there. So leadership is finding a way to close that gap. That's leadership. It's a form of leadership to which we all can and should aspire. I believe we need to redefine it. I want to make it about lollipop moments. How many of them we create? How many you say thank you for? How many you empower other people to create for themselves? Because we made leadership about changing the world, and there is no world. There's 8 billion understandings of it. You change one person's understanding of the world, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how many people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, and sometimes, far more importantly, how powerful an agent for change they can be in their own life. Every time you change one person's understanding of the world, you change the whole world. That's not beneath any of us, and it's not beyond any of us. And I think if we teach leadership like that, I think if we embrace leadership like that, and I think if we live leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And I think it's a simple idea, but it doesn't mean that it's a small one. Thank you all so much here. Thank you all so much at home for this and for everything you do to make my career better. Thank you, my friends. I really, truly appreciate it. I went over time.
Yes, you did. But that's okay. It was great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was going to sit on the plane on the way home and sleep, but now I got to rethink my life. Thanks. No, that was really amazing. You
well,
said
I'll tell you what,
great things.
Don't screw up when you're figuring it out.
So we're going to do some Q&A right now.
Amazing.
I know we're a little over, I'm sorry. But if anybody has any questions.
That's my bad. I'm sorry. I put Freeman specific stuff in and didn't account for
the time
extra time. I'm sorry.
We appreciate it. No, it was great how you tied it all in. If anybody has any questions, again, remember we're live, so we'd like the audience to hear. And for those who are online, if you do it in Zoom, you just hit the Q&A part. You can ask any questions. I don't know if we have any in line, but please do and he'll let me know. So anybody in the room have any questions for Drew?
Anything but math.
Okay.
Is your book on Audible?
It is, actually. And the hardest part about this book was actually reading it out loud for 14 straight hours.
Thank you.
Also, if you ever want to find typos in your book, read it out loud. Because if you hear the outtakes, it's basically, and then I turn, oh, son of a. Yes, it's on Audible. It's me. Listen to it on 1.25. They made me speak too slowly. It was really creepy. That's my mom who told me that. She's like, why are you talking so sensually? I'll take things I never want to hear my mother say for 500, Alex. Dear God. Other questions? You're just like, let us go home. You got one? Yes. Hi. I'll repeat her question. Traveling internationally the way I do.
What cultural influences do you see that drive what the meaning of leadership is?
What cultural differences do I see that drive what the meaning of leadership is because of all the international travel? It's really interesting. For instance, when I was in Singapore, when I asked people to identify their core values, when I was in Singapore, over 60% when we did some group work was humility. And I'm not going to lie, we hardly ever hear that in North America. A big part of it too, in Asian cultures, this is a very foreign concept I found. People find it weird to think about leadership as not being earned through things that can be evaluated by numbers. When I talked about it in the Middle East, I actually had a parent come to my hotel to yell at me because I had spoken at a high school and I had said to the students there, you should work incredibly hard to make your grades extraordinary, and then you should work twice as hard to make sure they're the least impressive thing about you. And they really didn't like that idea. Now, I also realize a friend of mine who is from China pointed out there has to be a bit of empathy here and understanding in that there's so many people in China that the difference between like a really successful career in life and not is simply how you are ranked. It's the way the culture works. So we also have to understand not to judge other people's way of looking at it, but leadership, particularly in more structured societies, I found in the Middle East and in Asian countries, is very much more about how older people evaluate you. It's very, very structured, and the idea of it not being is a little bit foreign, though people do welcome it. The idea of how you treat other people and how you are in control of other people are seen as two different things. And here in North America, there's a lot more flexibility. I think there's a lot more entrepreneurial concept of different types of leadership. But that's the biggest one that I've seen, is that the bureaucratic structures and the welcoming of that. In some cases, some cultures I found don't like the idea that they're in charge of their own leadership. It's a little bit odd for them, but people do kind of welcome the idea that they matter. And that, I think, is a key piece. But those are some of the biggest changes there. And humility and the idea of the collective outside of North America, particularly the United States, is much more developed. Socialism. Canadians, yes. God bless us,
I
right?
have a question from online.
Okay.
It's asking, does your book or your leadership program cover any mental health topics?
You know what? I do in the... we took some out of the book because we didn't want to make it so much about me. The online program does tell a lot more of the personal stories about how my decision to talk about mental illness was decided, and some of the ways in which it impacted my mistakes and how I've tried to recover from them. So we do talk a little bit about that. I will say also, one of the things that I find that I want to get across in this process is that this process is intended to be a roadmap through uncertainty. Because often when we're uncertain about the future, we hesitate to act in the present. We tread water because until we have certainty about the future, we don't want to possibly screw it up by what we do now. But it is a lot more important to be decisive than certain in life, because you can be decisive and you can't ever be certain. There'll be a lot of times in your life where you simply have no idea what the future holds. What this allows you to do is know what to do today, so that whatever happens when you get to the future, you can be proud of the person and you can have developed the person. My number one example of that is that, do you know, I've discovered something. You know when you know you're in love? Because it took me 38 years to discover this. We all have a million different versions of the future. We could work here. We could, be doing this. We could have this many kids, whatever. But all of a sudden, one day, you don't even realize it. You wake up and every version of your future has at least has one person in it, the same person. That's how you know. You don't even know when it happened. It took me 38 years to find that. And then every version of my future had her in it. And then 2 years ago, last month, she died by suicide, which blows up every version of my future. And for the number one thing for those of you who've gone through something like this is what you keep repeating to yourself is, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And eventually I came back to this. I am still rebuilding my concept of the future, but the way that this was a gift to myself was that even on the days where I had no idea what the future held, I had clear goals for that day. And the same thing has happened with my mental health, is that trying to realize this is going to be a part of my life forever. Alcoholism is a part of my life forever. I struggle with my weight consistently. Is that knowing this is what to do today. I talk a little bit about that more on the online program than I do in the book. It's a guidepost through dark. And it makes you feel as if no matter what the future holds, at least you can be proud of you. I don't know what I'm going to be like in 5 years, but I will be proud of the guy that I am when I get there, even with all the stuff I screwed up.
We do have another one online.
Sure.
It's asking, how do we close the gap between how we do act every day and how we want to act every day? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I think the number one is to actually identify more clearly how you want to. I think we're too vague about how we want to act every day. Like, we're just like, oh, I want to be good. The number one thing is, and this is what the book and the program talks about, is surface your own core values. And there's a process to do that. But even if you just want to say, I think it, pick one thing. Don't get overwhelmed by it. Start on day one with one thing that you feel capable of. And by that, I mean, look, I want to be someone who's more empathetic. I want to be someone of generosity. Generosity is a commitment to what? Here's the question I'm going to ask every day. I want to be clear. You will never fully close the gap between the person you want to be and how you are actually behaving. But when you identify one thing that you want to be consistent, day to day, you create that question and you answer it every day, you know that you've closed it a little bit. And when you feel confident doing that and it becomes second nature, you add another one. This is the process when you say, what are my tips for closing it? It's this. Pick the values you want to stand for, define them clearly, create a question, put them into your phone, have them show up at noon, 3, 6, and 9. Just pop up as a recurring one with the questions you want to answer. The ones you've already answered, you'll say, no problem. The other ones, you'll be like, now it's, at noon, you'll be like, I have all day. At 3, you'll be like, oh yeah, I got to get to that. At 6, you'll be like, oh, I'm tired. At 9, you'll be like, crap, I got to do it right now. But that's how you do it. That's how you start to close the gap. That's my practical way of doing it. Because I think what's most important is to actually do a how-to. That's where you start. And then you start to develop for yourself what seems to be working.
Does anybody in the room have questions? I don't want to take away from here.
I want to be in the room where it happens.
So we have one last one online. Oh, someone put a hand up?
No, she just recognized the Hamilton reference.
All right. How did you support the leadership skills in your most challenging student at the university?
Oh my goodness. What a great question. How did I, first of all, let me think of the most challenging. Okay, I got him. You know what a big part of it was? I asked him why. And I think one of the key things is that a lot of the reasons that we're challenging is an insecurity, right? We're compensating for other people making us feel like we're less. And a lot of bullying comes because a lot of bullies don't do well in school. And because we create a system where the kids who do well in school are given more adult attention and accolades, I think what happens is some of the students who aren't great at school have to find another way to feel fulfilled and powerful, and that's where bullying comes from. My most difficult student was always trying to gather attention, and usually at the taking away from other people. And so what I'd often do is after he behaved a certain way, be like, and in a way that wasn't like, why did you do that? It was more like, hey, why? Like, what made you feel like you wanted to do that? And when they realized that he wasn't being attacked for it, he often realized he didn't know why. But as you kept doing it, I kept asking, explain to me. In some ways, the phrase why can be a little attacking. So it'd be like, explain to me how, or I want to better understand what this is, because then they feel heard, but also in the process of trying to answer it, because often no one's ever asked them to explain themselves. Not in a way that's like, you tell me, but more like, I'm genuinely interested in what motivated what you just did. And it took a while because at first there's a big barrier, but we started to realize there's a fear there. At the base of every interpersonal or organizational dysfunction, there is a fear. There, people are afraid they're gonna have something taken away. Money, influence, respect, or they're gonna be given something they don't want. More responsibility, more stress. If we can find a way to address the dysfunction at the level of the fear that drives it, rather than the behavior that emerges from the fear, I think we're a lot more successful. So that's what we tried to do, is I tried to establish what this person was afraid of. And then what we try to do is figure out how we can all work together to make them less afraid. When people are annoying you, instead of saying, why the hell are they doing that? Or being like, I want to choke them out. Ask yourself, what are they afraid of? And then ask themselves, do they have the right to be afraid? Or is it rational for them to be afraid? Once we start realizing that the reason that we're conflicting with people is they're afraid of something, they become a little more human. And it's one thing I tell that students, particularly my students who are like, my parents are controlling my life. They want me to go to med school and I don't. I'm like, you know, your parents are afraid of being bad parents, right? The number one thing that you can do to be like considered an awful person in this society is to be a crappy parent. And they're so afraid that if you have a lousy career or job or you go hungry, that they're bad. And that's really terrifying. And they don't even realize it. So have some empathy for your parents. And instead of being like, you don't let me do what I want, be like, I know you're afraid of this. Why? And how can I help? And that's always it. Always go for the fear that's driving the behavior, not the behavior itself.
Awesome. Well, Drew, want to thank you on behalf of Forward and
Thank
Freeman.
you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been so
great
wonderful.
Topic,
I
great
appreciate
topic.
it. Thanks for all the time.
Absolutely,
Seriously.
absolutely. We will be sending out a survey after. In that, it will include a link to your online content, which is great, very generous of you. So thank you for doing that for our members. It's an opt-in, so if you'd like to receive that, please feel free on that survey. Want to thank the Las Vegas chapter, great chapter leaders out here, as well as all of those non-members out here. Please go to the website and join. This is exclusive content as well as additional, the mentorship program and some of our forward voices for those members that are already there. Keep plugging it with your friends. And then we also want to give everyone a save the date for June. We have another speaker, Celeste Headley, which is great. And she'll be talking to us about some great content there. And we're actually going to be hosting out of our DC branch, which is awesome. For those in the sales department, I know you guys are familiar with the NSO, but excited to be able to showcase that location across our enterprise as well. So thank you guys for attending today, and stay tuned for June. Thanks.
Thanks very so much for your time, my friend.